The sky above Earth burned a deep crimson, streaked with the wreckage of humanity's last desperate defense. The Exarith Dominion, relentless and seemingly invincible, had pushed humanity to the edge of extinction. Cities were reduced to smoldering ruins, and the last bastions of the human race were gathered in scattered enclaves, desperately clinging to life. Among them stood Captain Elia Graves, a hardened leader who had seen too many comrades fall, too many worlds burn. She watched as the horizon lit up with the flash of incoming Exarith warships, their colossal forms blocking out the sun, each one brimming with weapons designed to wipe Earth from existence. "I'll give them one last fight," Ilya whispered to herself, her voice tight with the weight of the responsibility she carried. Earth had been the cradle of humankind, and she would be damned if she let the Exarith extinguish their legacy. The final line of defense had been a lost hope, a forgotten project buried beneath the Earth's surface for centuries. It was the stuff of legend, whispered about in hushed tomes by the oldest survivors. The Iron Star. The project had been abandoned during the early days of the Exarith invasion, when humanity had been overwhelmed by their technology and ruthless strategy. But rumors persisted. There was a weapon beneath the ruins of what was once the greatest city on Earth, a weapon powerful enough to strike fear into the Dominion itself. The underground facility was a tomb, its location long since lost to time. Until now. Ilya's team, a ragtag group of scientists, engineers, and soldiers, had found the entrance, hidden beneath a forgotten cathedral, buried in the heart of a ruined city. They had fought their way through the remnants of Exarith patrols, crossing into the heart of the abandoned capital, where the past waited to be unearthed. Now, they stood before the entrance to the ancient complex, a towering door forged from a metal unlike anything seen in the known galaxy. It was scared with the passage of time, yet it radiated a strange, quiet energy. "Can you get it open?" Ilya asked, her voice steady, but her mind racing. The Exarith were coming, faster than anticipated. They had only hours, maybe less. Dr. Maravos, a brilliant but reclusive scientist, stepped forward, her hands trembling as she ran her fingers over the intricate glyphs that adorned the door. Yes, I can do it. It's not a standard lock. It's more like a puzzle. Give me a minute." Ilya nodded, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her blade. The sounds of distant explosions echoed in the distance, a constant reminder of how little time they had left. As Mara worked, Ilya's thoughts turned to the past. The Iron Star wasn't just any ship. It was a relic of a time before the Exarith. A time when humanity was part of something greater. An ancient alliance of species had created the Iron Star as a last line of defense against the Dominion. But its construction had been halted when the war turned in the Exarith's favor. Earth was abandoned, and the Iron Star was sealed away. The wind picked up, a harsh, howling gust that swept through the ruins, carrying with it the distant hum of engines. Ilya looked up, her heart sinking. The Exarith were almost here. They had found them. "Done." Mara's voice broke through the rising tension. With a grunt, she pulled a lever, and the massive door groaned open. Darkness stretched beyond it, but the faintest pulse of light beckoned them inside. Ilya led the way, her soldiers falling into formation behind her. The door slammed shut behind them, sealing them off from the world above. They were now in the belly of the beast, deep beneath the surface. And then they saw it. The Iron Star. Its massive frame lay dormant in the center of the cavernous chamber, half buried beneath the rubble of ages. The ship was unlike any craft Ilya had ever seen, sleek, powerful, and forged from a metal that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. It was beautiful in a way that made her breath catch in her throat. This was no ordinary weapon. This was a symbol of humanity's strength and will, crafted by those who had gone before them. "It's alive," whispered Lieutenant Jurek, his voice filled with awe. Ilya nodded, her eyes narrowing as the first tremors of an incoming attack reverberated through the ground. The Exarith were closing in. The Iron Star was their last hope. "We activate it now," she said, her voice commanding. The future of humanity depended on it. With a collective breath, they began the activation sequence. The room hummed with power as systems flickered to life, and the ship's massive engines began to stir. In that moment, Ilya understood something deep in her gut. Humanity was not yet defeated. Not while they still had the Iron Star. The battle for survival was about to begin. The Iron Star stirred with an energy that seemed almost alive, as though it recognized the presence of its crew. Ilya and her team stood at the heart of the ship's control center, bathed in the eerie glow of ancient consoles that blinked to life one by one. The walls hummed with power, and the air crackled with an unknown force. It was as if the ship itself had been waiting for them, waiting for humanity to return. "Is it safe to approach?" Lieutenant Jurek asked, his voice tense with the overwhelming sense of awe that filled the room. Ilya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched the central core of the Iron Star, a massive, pulsing orb of energy that hovered in the center of the command deck. For a moment, everything seemed still, suspended in time. Then, with a sudden, shocking jolt, a deep voice resonated through the chamber, reverberating against their bones. Human. The word was not spoken but felt, as though it had imprinted itself directly onto their minds. It was ancient, a voice long dormant, but still infused with power. Ilya's heart skipped a beat. "You are the children of those who forged me. What is your purpose?" The crew froze, exchanging looks of disbelief. Dr. Maravos, her eyes wide with astonishment, slowly stepped forward. It's speaking to us," she whispered. "It's sentient." Ilya took a cautious step forward, her hand instinctively resting on her pulse pistol. She had expected this ship to be a weapon, but she hadn't anticipated it to be alive, aware of its own existence. "We're here to fight," Ilya said, her voice steady, but beneath it lay a tremor of uncertainty. "We need your power. The Exarith are coming. We need to stop them." The ship's voice responded almost immediately, the words filling the room with a deep, resonant tone. "The Exarith, the scourge of many worlds. They are the reason I was created. Yet, I was abandoned, waiting. You are not the first to awaken me." Ilya's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? Who else has activated you?" The ship fell silent for a moment, and then the hum of its systems intensified. It was as if it were sifting through a vast expanse of memories, searching for something buried deep in its consciousness. "I was awakened once before, long ago, when your ancestors first called upon me. They, too, were desperate. And I delivered them to victory, but I was left here, alone." Ilya felt a pang of understanding. The Iron Star had not always been dormant. It had once been the pinnacle of humanity's power, forged in the fires of a galactic war against the Exarith. It had fought beside their ancestors, leading them to triumph over the alien threat. But with the fall of humanity's golden age, it had been abandoned, its creators long gone. Now, it was up to Ilya and her crew to reclaim that power and once again wage war on the Dominion. "You are my heirs." The ship's voice rumbled softly, almost like a whisper. "You will guide me to battle once more." Ilya's mind raced. The ship's power was beyond anything humanity had ever seen. She could feel it now, thrumming beneath her feet, coursing through the ship's very bones. But with that power came a responsibility she had never expected. "I don't understand. How do we control you?" she asked, a hint of urgency in her voice. The ship's response was quick, almost impatient. "I do not need to be controlled. You must trust in me, as those before you did. I will guide you, if you are worthy." A shiver ran down Ilya's spine as she realized what it meant. The Iron Star wasn't just a weapon. It was a partner, a living force, bound to humanity's will. To wield it was not a matter of simply giving orders. It required a deep, symbiotic connection, a partnership between the ship and those who called upon it. "We don't have time for this," Ilya said, shaking her head. "The Exarith are already on their way. We need to move now." Mara glanced at her, hesitant, But we haven't even begun to understand the ship's systems. We don't know what it's capable of. We'll learn as we go, Ilya replied, her voice resolute. The Iron Star was made to fight, and so are we. It's time to finish what our ancestors started. The ship's central core pulsed brighter, responding to Ilya's words. The energy in the air grew more intense, and the floor beneath them vibrated with raw power. The crew stepped back as the massive, sleek form of the Iron Star began to move. Its enormous engines hummed to life, and the ship slowly rose, hovering inches above the ground. The walls around them shook as the ship prepared to take flight, its engines glowing with a fierce, otherworldly light. "We're not alone anymore," Ilya said, her voice steady, but filled with a sense of awe. "We have a weapon, a partner, and we're going to use it to end this war." As the Iron Star began its ascent through the cavernous complex, the crew braced themselves for what was to come. The battle for humanity's survival had just begun. The Iron Star surged through the ruins of Earth's surface, its engines thrumming with the raw energy of ancient power. As it soared into the skies, the once desolate wasteland below slowly transformed into a blur of shattered cities and abandoned landscapes. Ilya stood at the command bridge, her hands gripping the console as she watched Earth shrink behind them, leaving her homeworld to be consumed by the fires of war. The weight of her responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. "We're not just running away," she muttered to herself. "We're striking back." Lieutenant Jarek, now stationed beside her, glanced at the radar screens. "The Exarith fleet is already entering Earth's orbit. We're just in time to get a head start." "Start what?" Maravos's voice echoed from behind. "We've only just activated the Iron Star. We don't even know what it's fully capable of. We're outgunned, outnumbered, and frankly, outclassed." Ilya turned to face her. "We have something that Exarith don't. Hope. Our ancestors fought them, and they won. This ship, it's a remnant of that war. If we trust it, and ourselves, we can do this." Mara shook her head, frustration coloring her voice. "You don't understand, Captain. This ship is not just a weapon. It's a relic, an artifact from a time long lost. Its creators were not humans. They were a part of an alliance of species. The Exarith destroyed that alliance. What makes you think we can wield the Iron Star any better than they did?" Ilya's eyes hardened. "Because we're different. The Exarith have underestimated humanity for centuries. This time, we'll make them regret it." The ship's voice, now a constant presence, resonated through the command center. "Your thoughts are your own, but your path is not. It is carved by the choices you make." Mara stared at the console. "What does that mean?" Ilya didn't answer right away. The Iron Star was speaking to her now, not just through its systems, but through some deeper, almost mystical connection. She could sense it, this vast, ancient intelligence that intertwined with her own, guiding her thoughts, feeding her strategy, amplifying her determination. It wasn't simply a ship. It was an extension of her will, a living being with a history intertwined with humanity's. Ilya turned back to the view screen, the stars stretching out before them. "It means we're ready. We've come this far. Now, we need to take the fight to the Exarith." The journey through the stars was far from a simple one. As the Iron Star shot through hyperspace, time seemed to distort and twist. The crew had no time to rest, no time to prepare for what awaited them. The ship's vast systems were still unknown to them, and while the crew could harness some of its power, they were mere novices in comparison to its true potential. But it didn't matter. They were driven by a single, unwavering purpose: revenge. On board, Ilya found herself more attuned to the ship's consciousness with each passing moment. The connection was becoming more than just operational. It was personal. It was like the ship's very spirit was whispering to her, urging her forward. She knew it was the will of her ancestors, the same will that had once guided humanity's greatest warriors in their battles against the Exarith. "Captain, we're approaching the coordinates." Jarek's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're close to the Exarith staging grounds." Ilya glanced at the display. The Exarith fleet had made camp around a massive gas giant, a natural stronghold. Their fleet had been gathering forces here for what they assumed would be the final strike against Earth. What they didn't realize was that the Iron Star had returned, and humanity had arrived to reclaim its future. The ship's engines roared to life, and the Iron Star dropped out of hyperspace with a thunderous jolt. The crew braced themselves, and Ilya's eyes narrowed as the Exarith fleet came into view. Massive warships surrounded the gas giant, their dark silhouettes casting ominous shadows across the swirling clouds below. "We've got one chance to make this count," Ilya said, her voice cold and commanding. "Engage them with everything we've got." The Iron Star's systems came to life, and within moments, the ship's weapons began to hum, unleashing devastating energy blasts that tore through the Exarith ships like paper. The first wave of enemy vessels disintegrated under the barrage. The power of the Iron Star was incomprehensible. Its weapons were like nothing that Exarith had ever encountered, fueled by technologies beyond their understanding. Jarek's voice crackled over the comms. "They're retaliating. Exarith warships incoming. 6, no, 8. The battle began in earnest, the vacuum of space now echoing with the violent clashes between the Iron Star and the Exarith. But Ilya wasn't content to just fight back. She wanted to make them suffer, to make the Dominion realize that humanity had returned, and with it, a fury they had never anticipated. Mara glanced at the sensors. "There's too many of them. We can't keep this up forever." Ilya's grip tightened on the console. "Then we'll make sure it's enough. Activate the Xanthian cannon." A tense silence followed. The Xanthian cannon was one of the ship's most devastating weapons, rumored to be able to breach even the heaviest of enemy shields. But it had never been tested. "I hope you're right," Mara muttered, as she initiated the sequence. The Iron Star's core flared with unimaginable energy, and with a deafening roar, the cannon fired. A massive beam of pure energy shot out, obliterating the Exarith ships in its path. The shockwave sent ripples through the fabric of space itself, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. The Exarith fleet faltered, stunned by the sheer power of the Iron Star. They had underestimated humanity once again. Ilya stood tall, her eyes locked on the wreckage before them. The first step toward reclaiming humanity's legacy had been taken, but the war was far from over. "Prepare for their counterattack," she said, her voice hard as steel. "We've only just begun." The victory was brief, as the remnants of the Exarith fleet drifted in the void, their once mighty warships broken and fragmented by the devastating firepower of the Iron Star. Ilya couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The power they had unleashed was immeasurable, but with it came a harsh reality. The Iron Star wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature, one that demanded control. "Captain, we've disabled their command ships," Jarek reported from the communication station. "But there's a problem. Their reinforcements are on their way. They'll be here in less than an hour." Ilya's heart pounded. She knew that the Exarith would retaliate, but the sheer speed of their reinforcements left her with little time to think. They couldn't afford to take another hit like that. The Iron Star had more weapons, but even it had limitations. "We need to find a way to draw them in," Ilya said, her voice cutting through the tension. "If we stay here, we're sitting ducks. We need a more advantageous position. Get us close to the gas giant. Use its moons for cover." "We can't outrun them in our current state, Captain," Mara said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "The Iron Star may be powerful, but it's still an old ship. Its systems aren't what they used to be." Ilya turned to face her, locking eyes. "We're not running. We're going to fight. We don't back down now." Mara nodded, her resolve hardening as she turned back to her station. "I'll make the adjustments. But Captain, this may cost us. The power output could destabilize the core. We need to be prepared for a meltdown." Ilya clenched her jaw, every instinct telling her to hesitate. The Iron Star was their only weapon, their only hope. If they pushed it too far, they risked losing everything. But there was no time for caution. "Do it," she ordered. The ship rumbled as its systems shifted, and the crew braced themselves as the Iron Star maneuvered closer to the gas giant. The moons loomed like silent sentinels, perfect for hiding the ship's massive bulk. If they could outsmart the Exarith long enough, they might just have a chance. The Exarith fleet entered the system like a storm, a dozen warships emerging from the blackness of space. Their sensors quickly locked onto the Iron Star, but Ilya had already planned for this. The Iron Star was cloaked in the shadow of one of the gas giant's moons, its engines powered down to near silence. They would wait. Time seemed to slow as Ilya's breath caught in her throat. Every second felt like an eternity, her fingers tapping nervously against the console. Her mind raced through every possible outcome, every strategy, every risk. "Do they know we're here?" Mara asked, her voice tight with anticipation. "I don't think so," Ilya replied, her eyes scanning the data feeds. "They're still trying to pinpoint our location. They're getting closer." The seconds stretched on, each one heavier than the last. Then the silence shattered. A burst of energy erupted from the Exarith fleet, their ships firing blindly into the dark, their weapons cutting through the emptiness. But the Iron Star remained undetected. Now, they struck. Now, Ilya barked. The Iron Star's weapons came online with a furious roar, and the ship surged forward from its hiding spot. The Exarith fleet was too distracted to react in time. The first wave of energy blasts from the Iron Star hit a Exarith battleship, disintegrating its shields in a flash of light. The explosion sent shockwaves through space as the Iron Star unleashed a torrent of fire. The ship's offensive systems hummed with raw, destructive energy, tearing apart anything in their path. The Exarith ships scrambled to regroup, but the Iron Star was already moving again, using its speed and maneuverability to keep them off balance. Ilya barked out commands, guiding the ship with precision. The enemy fleet, now scattered, was no longer the unified force it had once been. It was chaos. Direct hit to their main hull. Jarek reported, his voice filled with shock. "We've breached their shields. The lead ship is crippled." Ilya smiled grimly, but her heart was heavy. This battle wasn't over. The Exarith weren't just invaders. They were relentless, capable of adapting to any fight. They would send more reinforcements. They always did. As if on cue, another fleet of Exarith warships blinked into existence, far off in the distance, their arrival marked by a brilliant flash. "No way we can take on that many," Mara muttered under her breath. Ilya's jaw tightened. She could feel the tension rising within the ship's systems, the pressure of their limited time. The Iron Star was pushing past its limits, and every moment brought them closer to the inevitable meltdown. The thought of abandoning the battle was unthinkable. Yet, if they couldn't gain a decisive victory soon, the ship would become nothing more than a glorified tomb. "We can't outrun them, but we don't need to," Ilya said, her voice low. "Activate the destruction pulse. We'll end this here." Mara's eyes widened in disbelief. "Captain, that's the weapon's final use. After that, we won't have the power to defend ourselves." "I'm aware," Ilya said, her eyes steely. "But if we don't stop them now, we never will." Mara hesitated for a heartbeat before nodding. Preparing the pulse. The Iron Star's core began to hum with energy, its systems ready to discharge the most powerful weapon it had, one that could potentially level the entire enemy fleet. It was their last chance. "We won't get another shot like this," Ilya said, steeling herself for the aftermath. "Fire it." The Iron Star's energy systems flared to life, and the massive pulse shot out into the depths of space. The Exarith ships, caught off guard, had no time to react. The blast expanded outward, obliterating everything in its path. Entire warships were reduced to dust. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the ship's systems began to fail. The cost of the power they had unleashed had drained the ship's core to the brink. The Iron Star had done its part, but it had taken everything in return. "We've won," Ilya said, her voice tinged with relief. But the weight of the victory, along with the cost, hung heavy in her chest. "Now we need to survive long enough to finish this war." The Iron Star groaned as its systems flickered, struggling to maintain function after the massive energy expenditure. Warnings blared throughout the ship, signaling catastrophic failure in several critical systems. The massive blast they had unleashed had destroyed the Exarith fleet, but at a heavy price, one the Iron Star may not be able to recover from. "Damage report," Ilya barked, her voice steadied despite the tension in the air. Lieutenant Jurek worked furiously at his console. "Multiple systems are failing, Captain. Primary propulsion is down. Life support is operating at 40%. We've lost auxiliary power, and we're drifting. We're completely exposed." Ilya's heart sank. The Iron Star had won them the battle, but it had left them vulnerable, stranded in the depths of space, with no means of escape. Even if they somehow managed to survive the immediate threat, the ship's damage was too severe to make it back to Earth. They had gambled everything on a single strike, and now the reality of their situation was setting in. "Can we get to a nearby station? A friendly fleet?" Ilya asked, turning to Mara, who was scanning the nearby space lanes. Mara shook her head. "There's nothing in range. The closest colony is over 2 weeks' travel away, and we don't have the fuel to make it there. We're stranded, Captain." Ilya stood silent, gripping the console, every part of her being screamed at her to find a solution, but the weight of their situation pressed down on her chest like a vice. The crew had fought valiantly, but there was no guarantee they would make it out alive. For the first time, doubt crept in. Had they pushed too far? Was this the end of humanity's legacy? "Captain, we've detected something," Jurek said, his voice sharp with tension. "A ship approaching fast. Hexarith signatures." The words hit Ilya like a physical blow. Her gaze snapped to the view screen, and her worst fears were confirmed. Even with their fleet obliterated, the Exarith weren't done. Their war machine was relentless. More ships, dozens of them, emerged from the shadows of a nearby nebula, their dark forms closing in on the Iron Star. "We're sitting ducks," Mara whispered. "No," Ilya said, her voice low but resolute. "We're not done yet." She knew that they had no chance against such a massive force. But one thing had become clear. They couldn't run. They couldn't hide. The Exarith had come back for them, and they would need to stand their ground, no matter the cost. "What are we going to do?" Jurek asked, his voice tense. "We fight," Ilya replied. "We've come this far. We can't let them take us now. We'll make it count." Full power to the remaining weapons. Mara stared at her, disbelief in her eyes. "Captain, we're already on the brink." "The ship." "I don't care," Ilya interrupted, her gaze hardening. "If this ship dies, we die with it. We fight to the last." For a moment, there was a heavy silence, broken only by the hum of failing systems. But then, one by one, the crew nodded, their resolve strengthening in the face of impossible odds. They had fought back the Exarith before, together. They would do it again. "Captain, Iron Star systems are coming back online," Jurek reported. "We've got a small window to fight, but it's now or never." Ilya nodded. "Prepare for combat. We'll use every advantage we have." The Iron Star's weapons flared to life once more, but this time, Ilya was prepared for the consequences. The damage they had sustained meant that every shot would count, and every blast could be their last. Still, she would push the ship to its limits. The Exarith fleet closed in on them with relentless speed, their ships sleek and menacing, like predators scenting their prey. The Iron Star, barely holding itself together, was the last line of defense standing between humanity and annihilation. "Target their command ship," Ilya ordered, her eyes fixed on the view screen. If we can disable their leadership, the rest will scatter. The Iron Star's main guns fired. Each shot a deadly streak of light, but the enemy ships were relentless. The first volley struck the lead Exarith ship, tearing through its shields and leaving it vulnerable. But as the Iron Star prepared to fire again, the remaining fleet retaliated. Weapons blasts rang out, and the ship rocked violently. "We're taking fire," Jarek shouted. "Hull integrity is at 25%. The crew braced themselves as another barrage of enemy fire slammed into the ship, sparks flying from the console as the ship's systems struggled to keep up. But Ilya held her ground. "Keep pushing," she shouted. "We're not giving up now." The Iron Star continued to unleash a barrage of fire, its guns shaking with the power of each shot. But the Exarith fleet was vast, and they kept coming. The battle raged on, a violent dance of destruction that seemed to stretch into infinity. With each passing moment, the Iron Star was battered more and more, its once mighty frame beginning to show signs of its age. "We're losing power, Captain," Mara said, her voice cracking. "We can't keep this up much longer." Ilya didn't flinch. She knew what had to be done. "Prepare the last option." Jarek's eyes widened in shock. "Captain, the self-destruct sequence. You can't be serious." "I am," Ilya said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "If we can't win, we make sure they don't walk away from this. We take them down with us." The crew hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded, the gravity of Ilya's words sinking in. They had come this far. They weren't going to surrender now. "Self-destruct sequence initialized," Mara confirmed, her fingers shaking as she activated the countdown. With one last defiant roar, the Iron Star fired once more, taking out the command ship of the Exarith fleet in a spectacular explosion. The remaining ships faltered, and for the briefest moment, the tide of the battle seemed to shift in their favor. But as the self-destruct countdown reached its final seconds, Ilya allowed herself one final thought. Humanity had given its all. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The countdown echoed through the Iron Star's core like a death knell. 10 seconds remained. Ilya stood firm at the command bridge, the hum of the failing systems and the blaring alarms all around her blending into a cacophony of impending doom. She could hear the voices of her crew, urgent but resolute, working to make sure everything was in place. "Captain, the core is unstable," Jarek said, his voice tight with anxiety. "If we don't shut down the self-destruct in the next 5 seconds, there won't be any surviving this." Ilya's heart pounded in her chest. The Iron Star was a relic of an ancient war, its systems failing under the strain of continuous combat. The self-destruct sequence was their last option, but in these final moments, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still a way out, a way to win without losing everything. "Override it," Mara said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "We can still fight. We've got weapons left. We might be able to turn the tide." Ilya turned to her, meeting her eyes. There was no time for indecision, no time for doubt. They had sacrificed too much already, and the idea of surrendering now, of letting the Exarith fleet win, was inconceivable. "No," Ilya said firmly. "We've already pushed the Iron Star too far. If we don't detonate the core, the Exarith will eventually find a way to destroy us anyway. This is the only way to ensure they don't walk away from this." But even as she spoke the words, a deep part of her, the part that had led them through so many impossible odds, knew the truth. The Iron Star wasn't just a weapon. It was a legacy. It was humanity's final gift. And no matter what happened, it needed to survive. She had to find a way to preserve it. "Captain," Mara's voice trailed off, uncertain. "Shut down the countdown now," Ilya commanded, her voice resolute. The crew scrambled, but time was running out. The lights in the command center flickered as the ship groaned under the pressure of the failing core. The Exarith fleet was closing in, their remaining ships unleashing wave after wave of energy blasts. The Iron Star rocked violently as the strikes hit, but it held firm, its ancient armor still able to take the hits. The self-destruct countdown reached its final second. Then, silence. For a brief, agonizing moment, Ilya felt her heart stop. Had they failed? Had they triggered the end of everything? But then the alarms cut off, the lights stabilized, and a new familiar hum filled the air. The Iron Star's core had stabilized. The self-destruct had been disabled. Ilya closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of what they had narrowly avoided. The Iron Star was still alive, still in their hands, but they had no more time. The Exarith fleet was upon them. "We're still in this," Ilya muttered, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with unwavering resolve. "We fight until the very end." She turned to her crew, seeing the mixture of exhaustion, fear, and determination in their faces. They had already given everything they had. But it wasn't enough to stop the Exarith. "Get the engines back online," Ilya ordered. "If we can't fight them head-on, we'll outmaneuver them. Use the moons, anything we can to keep them off our back long enough to strike again. We can't let them take the Iron Star." Mara nodded, working furiously to reroute power to the engines, while Jarek tracked the enemy fleet's movements. The Exarith ships were fast, closing in, their weapons systems charging for another barrage. "We've got one shot left," Jarek said, his voice trained. "They're coming in fast. We can't outrun them, but we might be able to confuse them long enough to land a fatal blow." Ilya's mind raced as she formulated her next move. The Iron Star was the last piece of humanity's legacy, and it had to survive, no matter what. "Prepare the hyperwave disruptor," Ilya commanded. "I'll do the rest." The Iron Star's systems hummed to life as the crew scrambled to get the last weapon activated. The hyperwave disruptor was an experimental device, a relic of the ancient alliance, capable of disrupting the Exarith's advanced communications and navigation systems. In theory, it would cause their fleet to lose coordination, creating chaos long enough for them to make an opening. "We're almost there, Captain," Mara said, her fingers flying over the console. "We'll need a clear shot." The enemy fleet was closing in, their massive warships charging up their weapons for the final assault. It was now or never. The Iron Star had no time to maneuver. It would have to take the shot before the Exarith could lock onto them. "Now," Ilya shouted, her voice commanding, a single word that encapsulated every ounce of hope and fury in her. With a pulse of energy that seemed to freeze time, the hyperwave disruptor fired. A wave of distorted, blinding energy radiated outward, crashing into the Exarith fleet. Immediately, their communications scrambled, their ships faltered. The formation disintegrated, leaving their fleet disorganized and vulnerable. "Direct hit," Jarek reported, barely containing the astonishment in his voice. "We've crippled their navigation." Ilya's pulse quickened. The opening had come, but there was no telling how long it would last. The Iron Star was on its last legs, and they would need to strike decisively. "Activate the last of our power reserves. Fire everything we have," Ilya ordered, her voice unwavering. The Iron Star's remaining weapons roared to life, releasing a barrage of energy blasts that tore into the disoriented Exarith fleet. One by one, their ships began to explode, their once formidable fleet crumbling under the might of humanity's final stand. For a moment, it seemed as though they might actually win. But as the final enemy ships fell, Ilya couldn't shake the feeling that their victory had come at too great a cost. The Iron Star was dying, and the question remained, had humanity's legacy been worth the price? The Iron Star shuddered with every blast as the remaining Exarith ships crumbled under the barrage, their massive warships falling one by one. But as the final enemy vessel exploded into a ball of fire and debris, Ilya couldn't allow herself to savor the victory. There was no elation, only the grim realization of the price they had paid. The Iron Star's core was dimming, the once proud hum of its engines now a dying murmur. The ship had given everything. It had held the line, but now it was on the verge of collapse. "Damage report," Ilya ordered, her voice tinged with exhaustion, but still resolute. Jarek's face was grim as he looked at the readouts. Hull integrity is down to less than 10%, Captain. Primary systems are offline. We have no propulsion, no shields, no way to fight or escape. Ilya stood motionless, taking in the truth. They had won. The Exarith fleet had been defeated, but the Iron Star, the last of humanity's great warships, was beyond repair. It had fought valiantly, but now its time had come. Mara, Ilya said, her voice softer now. How long do we have? Mara's fingers danced across the control panel, her eyes flicking between the warning lights. 20 minutes, maybe less. The core can't hold on much longer. We're going to be out of power soon, and once that happens, there's nothing left. We'll be a derelict. Ilya nodded slowly. There was no escaping the inevitable. The ship was dying, and with it, so was humanity's last hope for survival. Captain, Jarek's voice faltered. His words caught in the weight of the moment. We made it. We stopped them. Ilya's eyes met his, and for the first time since the battle began, she allowed herself a breath. We did, she said quietly. We stopped them. Humanity's legacy is secure. But even as she spoke, a gnawing feeling of loss settled in her chest. They had won, but at what cost? The Iron Star was irreplaceable. It had been the pride of humanity's fleet, the last reminder of a time when Earth had fought for its survival among the stars. But now, there would be nothing left. Their victory would be hollow. The crew gathered in the command center, their faces worn with exhaustion. They stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, as the countdown to the end of the Iron Star ticked down. The ship's systems sputtered, sending a cascade of error messages across the screens. No one spoke. Ilya stood at the helm, staring out at the empty expanse of space. The stars were distant now, cold and indifferent. The Iron Star was dying, but its legacy would endure. Humanity had been tested, and had survived. They had given everything to ensure the future. And yet Ilya knew their survival came at a price. The cost of victory was a heavy burden to carry. Captain, Mara spoke quietly, breaking the silence. What will we do now? Ilya turned toward her, her gaze unwavering. She knew the truth now. There was no future without the Iron Star. It had been humanity's last line of defense, and now it was gone. But humanity itself wasn't done. They had lived to fight another day, and for that, they had to move forward. We rebuild, Ilya said, her voice firm and resolute. We rebuild and carry on. The Exarith may be defeated, but there will always be other threats. We've given everything to protect our home, but the fight doesn't end here. Humanity's legacy isn't in a single ship or a single battle. It's in all of us, the ones who carry on. Mara nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. The crew stood together, a bond forged in the heat of battle and the sacrifices they had made. They had fought for survival, and now they would carry that fight forward. Ilya's eyes lingered on the remains of the Iron Star, the once proud ship now battered and broken. It had been a symbol of humanity's strength, its ingenuity, and its resilience. And though the ship was gone, the legacy it represented would live on. In every person who had stood aboard it, in every heart that had fought beside it, the legacy of the Iron Star would never fade. The room was silent once more, but this time, there was a sense of quiet determination that filled the air. They had lost much, but they had gained something far more valuable: the unwavering will to survive. The crew knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready. Ilya looked out into the vast emptiness of space. The stars twinkled faintly in the distance, and though their future seemed uncertain, one thing was clear: humanity would continue. It would endure, and it would never forget the sacrifice of the Iron Star, the ship that had carried the last hope of Earth and ensured its survival. Prepare to abandon ship, Ilya said, her voice steady, but with a trace of sorrow. We'll make it to the nearest colony, and then will begin again. The crew moved as one, gathering their belongings and making their way to the escape pods. The Iron Star was dying, but they still had life in them. And with that life, they would carry the fire of humanity's legacy forward into the uncertain future. They had fought for this moment, and though the Iron Star would no longer sail the stars, humanity itself would continue to soar. The escape pods detached from the Iron Star one by one, drifting into the cold void of space, each carrying the last remnants of humanity's greatest ship. Ilya watched from the command bridge, her heart heavy with the loss, but her resolve unshaken. They had given everything to protect Earth, and though the Iron Star would never see the stars again, its legacy would live on in them. Through the viewport, she saw the ship begin to fracture, the once mighty vessel's hull giving way under the strain of its failing systems. The Iron Star was dying, but it had done its duty. It had ensured that humanity would have the chance to survive, to rebuild, to carry on. "Mara, how's the fleet?" Ilya asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was quiet but steady. Mara's face appeared on the screen, her eyes red from exhaustion, but her determination clear. "The nearest colony is still 5 days out, but we've got enough life support and resources to make it. We'll survive. It's just going to take time." Ilya nodded, her gaze shifting toward the distant horizon of space. Earth had been saved, but at a cost. The Iron Star had been humanity's final weapon, and now they were left to pick up the pieces. But as long as there were survivors, as long as there was hope, they would rebuild. "What about the Exarith?" Jarek's voice came through the comms. "Are we sure they're gone?" Ilya hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. The Exarith fleet had been shattered, their forces scattered to the wind. But Ilya knew better than to believe they were entirely defeated. There would be remnants of their kind, rogue ships, fractured fleets, and the threat of more invasions lurking in the galaxy. But for now, humanity had won, and it had paid a price. "We'll deal with the rest as they come," Ilya said. "For now, our priority is getting to the colony and ensuring the survival of everyone aboard. The fight isn't over, but this chapter is closed." She turned away from the viewport, her gaze sweeping over the escape pod bay where the crew had gathered. They were all here, the survivors. The ones who had fought, who had sacrificed, who had stayed true to humanity's enduring will to live. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. The Iron Star was gone, but in its wake, there was something more important. The crew and the legacy they carried. They were the bearers of the torch, the last hope for a future that had almost been lost. The escape pod's artificial gravity hummed softly as they neared their destination. Ilya could see the distant lights of the colony's docking station flickering on the horizon. It wasn't much, just a small outpost at the edge of human space. But it would be enough. For now. 5 days later, the survivors of the Iron Star made their way to the surface of the colony, a ragtag group of soldiers, engineers, scientists, and civilians. They had survived, and now they would rebuild from the ashes of war. They would find new allies, new ways to strengthen their defenses, and above all, they would ensure that humanity never again fell prey to the Exarith or any other threat in the galaxy. As Ilya stepped onto the surface of the colony, the harsh winds of the planet greeted her. But so did the warmth of a new beginning. The colony's lights flickered ahead, and though it was a small outpost, it was their new home. Here, they could start again. Here, they could rebuild. The legacy of the Iron Star had not been lost. It had been passed on, from the ship to the survivors, from one generation to the next. Humanity would rise from the ashes of its former glory, stronger and more determined than ever. The scars of war would never fade, but neither would the spirit of resilience that had carried them through the darkest of times. As Ilya stood at the forefront, watching her crew and the other survivors begin the long process of rebuilding, she felt a quiet sense of pride. The Iron Star had been more than just a ship. It had been a symbol of humanity's strength, ingenuity, and determination. It had been a beacon in the darkness, guiding them through the storms of war. And now, the torch had been passed. The Iron Star was gone, but the heart of humanity still beat strong. Ilya turned to face her crew, the survivors who had fought alongside her. She knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. "We're not done yet," Ilya said, her voice carrying over the winds. "Humanity's future is still ahead of us. We'll carry the Iron Star's legacy with us, no matter where we go. And we will never stop fighting to protect it." Her crew gathered around her, their faces tired but filled with hope. The war had ended, but the struggle for humanity's survival was far from over. And together, they would carry the flame of that legacy into a new dawn.